In Chinese history, there's no more prized of a weapon than a famous sword, or 宝剑 in Chinese. Such a sword in the hands of the right warrior could change the outcome of a battle or the course of history. And out of all the famous swords in Chinese history, there is none more famous than the sword of the King of Yue, or Yue Wang Goujian. This sword is so exquisite that when it was found during the excavation of a tomb in 1965, it was still sharp, and it had not rusted despite spending 2,500 years in a damp chamber underground. It's made of an unusual bronze alloy that allowed it to be both sharp and strong, forged in the fires of Mount Doom. And okay, that last part was a joke, but the level of technology to force such a weapon is far beyond what would be expected in China during the Warring States period 2,500 years ago. This is the story of the Sword of Goujian, the weapon that shouldn't exist. In 1965, a tomb dating back to the Chu state during the Warring States period was excavated near Jingzhou city in Hubei province. In the tomb, they found a sword that after the near airtight scabbard was opened, they found to be still sharp. The blade had an unusual diamond pattern. Blue gemstones were mounted on the handle, and the sword bore the inscription in an ancient script called bird and bug script, Niao Chong Shu, stating that this was the sword of King Goujian of Yue, and he'd made it and used it himself. So, who exactly was Goujian? Well, he was the king of the Yue state that existed during the Warring States period in the southeastern part of the territory that is China today. So here are all the warring states, which were considered part of historical China at that time, and here is Yue right down here. So it wasn't really part of China at the time, although as you can see on the sword, they used Chinese characters, and I think the whole look of the society, from clothing to architecture to weapons, would probably have still had an ancient Chinese feel. China was the center of the world at the time, and they would have learned a lot of things from China. But anyway, let's talk about how the sword was made. In fact, both the state of Yue and the state of Wu were known for their sword-making skill. These southern swords were sought after in the Warring States period. King Goujian had 5 precious swords, which all had names. There is a description of these swords in Yue Jue Shu, or historical texts of the Kingdom of Yue, written during the Han Dynasty. It starts off saying, in former times, King Goujian of Yue had 5 precious swords. They were known across all under heaven. He had a guest who appreciated swords named Xue Zhu. The king met with him and said, I have 5 precious swords, please inspect them. Now, the first few swords that Xue Zhu sees he doesn't like, and he maintains that they aren't precious swords. That is until the king brings out a sword named Chunjun, or purity, which is so exquisite that Xue Zhu nearly has a heart attack. The book goes on to explain. The king fetched purity. Xue Zhu had heard of it and suddenly looked like he was collapsing. After that, he looked terrified. He went down the steps, thinking deeply, arranged his clothes and sat down looking at the sword. His hands shook as he brushed over it and raised the sword. He clasped it like a hibiscus starting to grow. He inspected its pattern, which shone like constellations of stars. He looked at how it reflected light, which was like water overflowing a dam. He looked at its cutting edge, which was sharp like a razor. He looked at its quality, which shone like ice crystals. Xue Zhu said, "Is this the so-called purity?" The king said, "It is. A guest of mine valued it at 2 market towns, 1,000 fine horses, and 2 cities of 1,000 households. Is that true?" And so you're probably thinking that Xue Zhu would say, yes, it is worth all those things. But no. Listen to what he says next. Xue Zhu replies, no. When this sword was forged, Mount Chijin burst open, delivering tin. The Ruoye stream dried up, revealing copper. The rain god washed the metal. The god of thunder blew the bellows. Dragons stoked the furnace. The god of the sky provided the charcoal. And Lord Tai Yi watched from above, infusing the essence of heaven into the sword. So it was forged in Mount Chijin, not Mount Doom, but basically the same thing. He implies that it is priceless since it was created with the help of the gods, and he goes on to say that the mine at Chijin Mountain is now blocked. The Ruoye stream is now too deep, and the master who forged it is now dead. The conditions to forge such a weapon are gone. And actually, guys, I should just point out, it is not known which sword the Sword of Goujian is, whether it is the one called Purity or another one from King Goujian's collection. Now, whether you believe all that stuff about dragons and gods is up to you, but that doesn't change the fact that this weapon is indeed exquisite and made of the two elements tin and copper, like Xuezhu said, which together make bronze. The composition and manufacture of the sword is genius. So let's now look at it from a modern scientific perspective. So there is a research study in the National Library of Medicine that you can read online if you want to, where they test the metal from a fragment of another sword that was found in the same tomb as the Sword of Goujian. The actual Sword of Goujian is in China, and they don't allow it to be loaned out to museums anymore because it was damaged at one time, and so foreign researchers are unable to currently study it. Anyway, the paper explains that this sword fragment is made of a CuSN alloy. If we look at the periodic table, Cu is copper and Sn is tin. Now, if you don't know, these two metals make up bronze. Basically, bronze is an alloy that is copper with about 12 to 12.5% tin and possibly some trace amounts of other metals. But the research study found that in this particular sword, they used unusual proportions of copper and tin in different layers to create the perfect sword. You see, creating a sword is a balance between hardness and toughness. Hardness refers to the metal's ability to resist wear and maintain a sharp edge, while toughness is the ability to resist fracturing when struck. The body of the sword was found to be 81.5% copper and 18.5% tin. This provided the toughness and flexibility in the body of the sword. It wouldn't just shatter into pieces when struck. But then they found an additional tin-rich layer measuring between 0.1 and 0.3 millimeters thick on the blade of the sword. This layer was found to be just 53.5% copper and 38.5% tin and small amounts of a few other elements. This gave the blade incredible hardness to hold a sharp edge, but it wouldn't be brittle since it was backed up by a very tough sword body. The researchers calculated a time scale for adding this layer on the surface of the blade, anywhere from a few hours to a few days, depending on what temperature their furnace could operate at. It would take 11 days at 600 degrees Celsius or 1112 degrees Fahrenheit, for example. But they then go on to say the ancient Chinese technicians might have added catalysts or active agents or energizing reagents for accelerating the SN diffusion process when dip or wipe tinning, as we do today in the industry, implying that they may have had technical knowledge beyond their time to manufacture these weapons without them spending 11 days in a furnace. The conclusion of the research paper was that such a composite sword overturns our perception of the ancient bronze manufacturing technique, and that the materials processing level was beyond our expectations for ancient China 2,500 years ago. So, was there anything that could match the Sword of Goujian? Well, there was the Spear of Fuchai, the weapon of the king of the neighboring state of Wu, which also features an inscription that it was the king's personal weapon. I love this guy on Twitter's comment. Every leader needs a rival who also has a signature weapon. You gotta have a signature weapon, guys. Otherwise, what kind of main character would you be? All right, guys, that is the video for today. If you like this kind of stuff, do consider becoming a member of our channel for $4.99 per month. It really helps us out since it's hard to make money with cultural content, but it is our passion. You'll get early access to many of our videos, and your comments will be highlighted to us so we can reply if you ask a question. If you're not ready to do that, you can still just subscribe, which is free, and you'll still see all of our regular uploads when they are publicly released. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.